My sister mocked my loneliness for years, but now that she has no friends, she wants me to be there for her. I, 26 male, have always been the quiet one in my family. Ever since I was a kid, I preferred books over loud gatherings, video games over parties, and deep conversations over small talk. My sister, 29 female, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. She was the golden child, social, outgoing, and effortlessly popular. Growing up, she made sure I knew just how different we were. She'd mock me for spending weekends alone, roll her eyes whenever I declined an invite to one of her chaotic friend meetups, and even joke to our parents that I'd end up being a hermit living in a basement. I laughed it off most of the time, but deep down, it hurt. It was as if my personality was a flaw she needed to point out at every opportunity. For years, our dynamic remained the same. She had her world of endless social events, and I had my quiet space. I never wished anything bad for her, I just accepted that we weren't close, and we never would be. But recently, everything changed. She had a massive falling out with her friends, though she hasn't shared the full details. From what I gathered, it was ugly. One day, she was the center of her social universe, the next, she was completely shut out. No texts, no invites, no weekend plans. And that's when she suddenly started reaching out to me. For the first few days, I ignored her messages. Not out of spite, but because it felt unnatural. My sister had never shown any interest in spending time with me before, so why now? But she kept trying. She texted me about grabbing coffee, watching a movie, even playing video games, something she had always mocked me for. When I finally agreed to meet her, more out of curiosity than anything else, I noticed something was different. Without her usual crowd around, without the constant validation, she seemed lost. For the first time, my sister was experiencing something I knew all too well: loneliness. She tried to play it off, saying things like we should have been closer before and how she always wanted to spend more time together. But the cracks in her act showed quickly. One night, in the middle of a conversation, her voice wavered, and she admitted it, she felt invisible. The friends she once considered family had completely cut her off, and she didn't know how to handle it. I wanted to feel sorry for her, I really did. But a part of me couldn't forget all the times she laughed at my loneliness, as if it were a character flaw. I sat there, listening to her unravel, but something in me refused to offer comfort right away. Maybe it was the years of quiet resentment, or maybe it was the fact that she never once cared when the roles were reversed. When I was the one sitting alone at lunch, when I spent birthdays with nothing but a book and a slice of cake, when she and her friends whispered and giggled about how pathetic I was for never going out, where was this kindness then? Still, despite everything, I wasn't cruel. I didn't rub it in her face or throw her past words back at her. Instead, I just asked, why me? She hesitated. Then, with a sort of raw honesty I had never seen from her before, she admitted, because you've always been okay on your own. And I don't know how to be. That sentence hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. She had spent years treating my solitude like a joke, and now she was sitting in front of me, admitting that she envied my ability to be alone. It was almost ironic. But at the same time, I realized something: she wasn't reaching out to me because she suddenly valued me as a person. She was reaching out because she was desperate. Because she had no one else. That stung more than I expected. Still, I wasn't heartless. I told her the truth, that being alone wasn't something I chose, it was something I learned to live with. That I didn't wake up one day and decide I didn't need anyone. It was years of being left out, years of realizing that I wasn't like everyone else, that made me the way I am. And I reminded her that she was part of that. She looked down, fidgeting with her hands, and for the first time, she had no snarky comeback, no excuse. Just silence. She sat there, quiet for once, and I could tell she was struggling to find the right thing to say. Maybe for the first time in her life, she realized that an apology wouldn't be enough. That some wounds don't just disappear because you finally acknowledge them. I didn't need her to beg for forgiveness, but I also wasn't going to pretend the past didn't happen. So I asked her, point blank, if they took you back tomorrow, would you still be here? She looked up at me, startled. For a second, I thought she might lie, but then I saw it, the flicker of guilt in her eyes. She knew the answer, and so did I. If her friends suddenly welcomed her back with open arms, I'd become invisible to her again. Just like before. And that realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't here because she valued me. She was here because she needed anyone, to fill the silence she wasn't used to. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It wasn't like I expected anything different, but hearing the truth unspoken as it was made my decision easier. I wasn't going to be her temporary fix, her emotional crutch until something better came along. I had spent too much of my life being overlooked to let myself be used now. So I told her, as calmly as I could, I'm not a backup plan. She looked like she wanted to argue, to say something to convince me otherwise, but what could she say? We both knew the truth. She had spent years pushing me aside, and now she expected me to be there just because she was struggling for the first time. I wasn't going to be cruel, but I also wasn't going to pretend that we could suddenly be close just because she was lonely. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and told her that if she truly wanted a relationship with me, she needed to prove it when she wasn't just desperate for company. Then I walked away. She didn't chase after me. She didn't call my name or try to stop me. And honestly, I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. As I walked home, I kept expecting a text, a message, some kind of effort on her part. But my phone stayed silent. Maybe that was my answer. Maybe she wasn't ready to put in the effort, or maybe she had already decided that I wasn't worth it once I stopped being convenient. And that was fine. I had spent years learning to be okay on my own, and I wasn't about to unlearn that now. I wasn't going to beg for a connection that had never truly been there. If she ever reached out again, not out of desperation, but out of real effort, I'd listen. But until then, I wasn't waiting around. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one walking away. It's been about 6 months since I walked away from my sister that night, and I honestly didn't expect to hear from her again. After all, she had spent most of our lives pretending I barely existed unless she needed someone to mock. I figured she would either find a new group of friends or keep living in denial about why she ended up alone in the first place. And for a while, that seemed to be the case. No texts. No calls. Nothing. It was like I had never been a part of her life at all, which, in a way, proved my point. Then, out of nowhere, she reached out. A short, almost hesitant text, "Hey, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time before deciding whether to respond. A part of me wondered if this was just another cycle, if she had found herself alone again and was looking for a temporary emotional crutch. But something about the message felt different. There was no forced friendliness, no fake warmth. Just a simple question. And for some reason, I answered. We met at a small cafe near my place, Neutral Ground. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked different. Not in any dramatic way, but there was something in her posture, the way she kept glancing at the door like she wasn't sure if I'd actually show up. For the first time, she didn't have that effortless confidence, that aura of someone who always knew they belonged. She looked nervous. I sat down across from her, waiting for her to speak first. She took a deep breath and, to my surprise, she actually apologized. Not just a half-hearted "I'm sorry you felt that way" kind of apology, but a real one. She admitted that she had been cruel to me for years, that she had used me when she had no one else, and that she never really saw me as a person outside of the role she had assigned me. I don't deserve another chance, she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. But I want one anyway. I didn't answer right away. Not because I wanted to make her uncomfortable, but because I genuinely didn't know how I felt. Hearing her say those words I never thought she was capable of, should have felt like a victory. But instead, I just felt tired. I had spent so many years being treated as an afterthought, a joke, that forgiveness wasn't something I could just hand over like it was nothing. So I asked her, why now? She looked down at her hands, fingers tightening around the coffee cup. Because I lost everything, she admitted. And for the first time, I had to sit with myself and realize. I didn't like the person I was. I pushed everyone away. And when I looked back, really looked back, I saw you. I saw how I treated you. And I hated myself for it. Her voice broke slightly, and for the first time in my life, my sister looked small. Human. Not the untouchable, confident person she always pretended to be. I let her words settle, watching as she struggled to keep her composure. A year ago, I would have given anything to hear her admit this, to acknowledge the way she treated me, to feel even a fraction of the loneliness she once laughed at. But now that it was happening, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had won anything. All I felt was the weight of everything she had done, and the uncertainty of whether I could ever really trust her again. I don't know what you want from me, I finally said. It wasn't meant to be cruel, just honest. Because I truly didn't. Did she expect me to just forget everything? To suddenly become the sibling she had never let me be? She shook her head. Nothing, she said. I don't expect anything. I wanted to tell you the truth. I wanted you to know that I see it now. And if you ever decide you want to try again, I'll be here. Her words hung between us, heavy and uncertain. For the first time, she wasn't trying to control the outcome, wasn't pushing for an immediate resolution. And that, more than anything, made me pause. The sister I had known would have fought, would have argued, would have tried to manipulate the situation until she got what she wanted. But now, she was just sitting there, willing to accept whatever answer I gave her. That alone was enough to make me consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she had actually changed. Still, change wasn't something I could take at face value. People don't undo years of cruelty overnight, and I wasn't going to set myself up to be hurt again. I'm not ready, I told her, and I meant it. I don't hate you, but I don't trust you either. If you really want to fix things, that's not something you can do in one conversation. She nodded, like she had expected that answer, and for once, she didn't try to argue. I get it, she said. Take whatever time you need. For the first time in our lives, she didn't push. She didn't try to guilt me into forgiving her, didn't roll her eyes or act like I was being dramatic. She just sat there, nodding, accepting that she couldn't undo everything with a single apology. And maybe that was the biggest shift of all, she was finally realizing that actions had consequences, that words didn't erase years of damage. That if she wanted a relationship with me, she had to prove it, not just expect it. We didn't end that conversation with some grand resolution. There were no hugs, no emotional breakthroughs that magically made everything okay. But when we left the cafe, she didn't just disappear from my life again. Over the next few months, she made an effort, not in big, dramatic ways, but in small, steady ones. She'd check in every now and then, not just when she needed something. She'd send me random articles about things she knew I liked, things she never used to care about. And she never once pressured me to respond. For the first time, she wasn't trying to be part of my life on her terms, she was letting me decide if I wanted her there at all. I kept my distance at first, unsure if this was just another phase, another attempt to smooth things over before she moved on. But time passed, and she didn't stop. She didn't push, didn't try to insert herself where she wasn't wanted, she just showed up in small, consistent ways. And little by little, I found myself responding. Not out of obligation, not because I felt guilty, but because I wanted to. Because, for the first time in my life, I felt like she was actually trying. I won't say we're suddenly the kind of siblings who share everything, who are inseparable after years of distance. That's not how life works. But we've started talking more, in ways that don't feel forced. She's learning how to exist without needing a constant crowd around her, and I'm letting myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this version of her is real. I don't know what the future holds, but for now, I'm okay with this. And for the first time, I think she is too. It's been almost a year since my sister and I started talking again, and if you had told me back then that we'd be in this place now, I wouldn't have believed you. Our relationship is still a work in progress, there are moments when the weight of the past lingers, when I wonder if she's truly changed or if this is just another phase. But, to my surprise, she's remained consistent. No sudden disappearing acts, no attempts to manipulate or guilt me into anything. Just small, steady efforts to rebuild what she once tore down. She's different now. Not a completely new person, but she's lost that untouchable, effortless confidence that used to make her feel like she was above everyone else. She still has friends, but she's more careful about who she lets in. The version of her that thrived on being the center of attention doesn't exist in the same way anymore. And weirdly enough, I think she's happier for it. She doesn't say it outright, but I can tell there's less desperation in the way she carries herself, less need to prove something to the world. At first, I thought maybe she was just mellowing out with age, but the more time we spent together, the more I realized losing everything forced her to face who she really was. And for the first time in her life, she had to sit with herself, without the safety net of constant validation. She told me once, in a rare moment of vulnerability, that she used to fill every quiet moment with noise because she was terrified of what she'd hear if she listened too closely. Now, she doesn't run from silence the way she used to. That change made it easier for me to let my guard down too. I won't pretend that I forgot everything overnight, but I don't hold on to it with the same weight I once did. She's given me no reason to. And while I never thought I'd say this, I actually enjoy spending time with her now. It's not forced, not something I tolerate out of obligation, it just feels normal. Like we're finally figuring out what it means to be siblings, without the baggage of who we used to be. A few months ago, something happened that really proved to me how much she had changed. We were at a small family gathering, nothing major, just dinner with our parents and a couple of relatives. At one point, a cousin made a joke about how I used to be the weird loner of the family, the kind of thing my sister would have laughed at in the past. But this time, she didn't. Instead, she shut it down, casually but firmly, saying something like, "You realize he just liked his own space, right? Not everyone needs a crowd to feel whole." It wasn't some grand gesture, but it meant more than she probably realized. It was in that moment that I understood she wasn't just acting different around me. This wasn't just an apology tour or some desperate attempt to make things right. She had genuinely grown. She wasn't seeking my forgiveness just to ease her own guilt, she was working to be a better person, even when I wasn't watching. And that, more than anything, made me believe that maybe, just maybe, this new version of our relationship was real. A few weeks later, she did something I never expected. She actually thanked me. Not just for giving her another chance, but for being honest with her when she first reached out. She admitted that if I had immediately forgiven her, if I had let her back into my life without making her prove she had changed, she might have never faced the things she needed to. "You could have let me keep lying to myself," she said. "But you didn't. And I needed that." Hearing her say that, I realized something, too. I hadn't just been protecting myself by keeping her at a distance. In some way, I had helped her grow. That's not to say everything is perfect now. There are still moments when I catch myself hesitating, wondering if I'm being naive for trusting her again. But those doubts are becoming less frequent. For the first time in our lives, we have a relationship that isn't built on mockery, resentment, or obligation. It's real. And while I never expected us to get here, I can finally say that I'm glad we did.